As a solar technician, I use thermal cameras a lot just to check on existing equipment, make sure there's not unseen loose connections, bad connections, if there's terminal blocks that are going bad and they're heating up and you can't see that yet, but you can see it with a thermal camera. It's been a while since I've gone through the process of figuring out what is on the market, what are the best thermal cameras out there, so I figured I would take you through my thought process while I'm trying to find a new thermal camera for myself. There's roughly 3 categories of thermal imager that you're looking at. There's way down at the low end, the consumer grade ones. There's sort of the middle prosumer type of cameras. And then there's really high end, like the really pro stuff, which can go anywhere from like $2,000 to $10,000 or more. You'll see a lot of people talking about the ones that you can plug directly into your phone. These ones I would classify as the really low-level consumer stuff. So if you're a homeowner and looking for something that will just give you an idea of what the thermal radiation is around in your house at different spots, see if you have general heat leaks or something, these are not bad. The main reason I would steer professionals away from using something like this is they're really, really low resolution. You have to have it plugged into your phone. If your phone's on low battery, you can't be taking thermal images because you need to both have this battery and your phone good. It's a lot of management. Now at the very high end, you have these ones with like the pistol grip that you can get a very, very good resolution. You can change a lot of stuff on the screen. It's all in one package. This doesn't have to interact with your phone, but usually they do. But you can work with that on your laptop, whatever you have, generally. But those can be super expensive and are often way more than most people need. Like in my circumstance, I really like this level of thermal imager. These middle of the line point and shoot camera types are much more convenient for most things. They're very compact, they don't require you to be using your phone, but you certainly can import things onto your phone from these. So these are what we're going to be talking about today. I got 4 thermal cameras from different brands, and they generally run from the $500 to $700 range of cost, which is great for a professional looking for a thermal camera. We're going to take a look at each one of these to see what their specifications are, how easy they are to use when you're pointing and shooting, and how easy they are to use on the software side. So first, let's talk about specs. We're going to start off with the daddy brand of thermal cameras, which is FLIR and their FLIR C5. The MSRP on this thing is $819, but I think I found it for $600. The thermal resolution on this is 160 by 120, which is the lowest of all of the ones that I'm reviewing today. Just for context. It does have Wi-Fi syncing. Again, all of these are going to have Wi-Fi. They say it's a 4-hour battery. That's also the same with the rest of these that I'm reviewing. And the field of view is 54 by 42. Field of view is important if you want to capture as much while standing as close to a thing as possible. It just makes it more convenient to pack more of a picture into a smaller space. The next one we're going to hit is actually a newcomer to thermal cameras. It is the Klein Tools TI-290 Pro Thermal Imager. Now these are $500 straight up, and their resolution, this is interesting, they talk about the resolution in terms of number of pixels, which basically nobody else does. The resolution is 49,152 pixels, which that feels like a lot of pixels, right? And it's a pretty decent resolution. If you do the math, this is a 256 by 192 resolution, which is a totally decent resolution. It's fine. I don't know why they feel like they need to obscure that resolution behind a weird pixel count, but whatever, it's fine. Again, of course it has Wi-Fi. The field of view is about 55 degrees. I don't know what the other half of the field of view is, but that's what the specs say. Now, something to note about this thing that you may or may not care about, this does not have any sort of mount anywhere for a tripod. So if you're somebody that prefers a tripod, this is going to be an issue. Moving on, we have the HIC Micro Pocket 2, which is their second version of this style of camera. You can get this thing for $600. Again, the resolution is 256 by 192, which matches the Klein one. They say it's a 50 degree by 37 degree field of view, 4-hour battery, it's got the tripod thing. And what's really interesting about this one to me is that this has a 25 hertz refresh rate. If you've never used a thermal camera before, most cameras in the industry are like 9 hertz or below, which means while you're trying to frame your shot or you're shooting or you're trying to zone in on a spot, the picture on the screen is very jerky, janky. It's 9 hertz, which this video you're watching is 30 hertz. So imagine less than a third of that frame rate, and you're right about there. It's a nice feature that I don't know why HIC Micro is able to do and nobody else is, but definitely an interesting thing. The last camera we're looking at is the Seek Shot Pro. This is their Pro version of this body of camera. This costs $559. The resolution is higher than all of these at 320 by 240 pixels. They say a 57-degree field of view, which is wider than any of these other cameras. This has the lower 9 Hz refresh rate, which is on par with most thermal cameras. The interesting thing about this one is you can attach macro lenses to this thing. Now, for what I do, that doesn't matter literally at all. The only reason you'd want this is if you're working with little electronics and you're trying to get really down specific into a circuit board or something, trying to find hotspots, what have you. So that's not really a use case that I would have, but it's an interesting thing regardless. So now that we've talked about specs, let's talk about the actual use of the devices. If you're not familiar with how thermal images work, there's often a lot about an image that can be edited after the fact. But the fact of the matter is, it's often more convenient to be able to change those parameters on the camera itself instead of waiting to go back to your computer or your mobile device, wherever your software is that you use to edit those photos. So the things that I want to be able to do is change the span and level of the temperature bar on the side. This dictates how the colors interact with how hot or cold different parts of the image are. You can tune it in to show very specific issues using this feature. And if you can lock this setting in for multiple pictures, it can make it really useful after the fact to be able to do comparisons of similar boxes. Second, I want to be able to change the emissivity of the picture as well as the background temperature. If you don't know why you need that, you should go take a course because it's important, and if you don't know why those things are important, you're going to be taking images that aren't accurate, or you might be seeing things that aren't there. And the last thing, this is kind of a bonus, but it's useful to be able to put a box on the screen that shows your high point, your low point, and the average of that box instead of just having that central cursor. It can be useful for gathering things like background temperature of an image, and we're not going to get into all the specifics of why that's important. We're just going to assume this is what I want. And let's talk about how they did. The FLIR C5 passed almost all of the tests. That box I was talking about, you can activate that on the FLIR C5, but it only shows the high and the low temps. It doesn't give you the average, which is annoying, but you can change that in software afterwards, which we'll get into that. You can absolutely change the emissivity and the background temperature, as well as a bunch of other parameters that are important for specific temperature taking if you want to get really, really accurate temperatures. And you can totally change the span, the level and the span on that temperature bar to be exactly what you want, which is nice. In my experience in dealing with the actual on-screen UI with the touchscreen, FLIR has some of the nicest interaction that I've seen. It's clearly a product of years of refinement in their various cameras, and it's just nice to use. I will say, and I don't know if I got footage of this, but there was an issue where the FLIR C5 would keep going grayscale and refuse to calibrate until I power cycled it a couple of times. That is not great and really annoying if that happens on site. If I'm sitting there struggling to get my thermal camera to calibrate and take a picture, that is absolutely time that I'm losing during the day to get my inspections done. I don't know if that's a common thing, but the fact that I just randomly bought a C5 and that was what was happening, that concerns me. I've also had previous FLIR cameras of this style have issues with calibrating pretty quickly after like a year or so. That concerns me for this particular camera type. We'll move on to the Klein next. Now the Klein is a very low feature thermal camera. There's no touchscreen, only buttons, which is not necessarily a slam against it. If I would sometimes prefer a good button interface over a crappy touchscreen interface. So again, it's not a knock, but it did fail almost all of my tests. There's no ability to dial in the high and the low temperature, only turn the temperature scale on and off. It's just stuck on automatic all the time. You can change the emissivity, but there's no setting for the background temp. And there's no ability to change the cursor to anything other than just the middle cursor. So you can't get the box, you can just turn the cursor on and off. But I mean, it's a nice little package, like it points and shoots, fine. It's just if you want to customize anything, you cannot. It's just not an option with the Klein. Now, the HIC Micro is good. So the HIC Micro does just about as well as the FLIR in terms of features. You can set the level and the span to what you want, but the interaction model is glitchy at best. The thing about the entire UI of the HIC Micro is that it looks like somebody copy and pasted a generic Android UI onto a touch screen that works but maybe is not well optimized to the software. So scrolling is really annoying, and you have to scroll to get to the temperatures you want on that temperature bar, and it's specific down to 1 decimal point. So if you want to go from 34 degrees to 35 degrees, you have to scroll through 10 segments of 34.1, 34.2, 34.3 until you get to 35, and it's annoying. You can do it, it's just annoying. In terms of the emissivity and background temp, you absolutely can set those to whatever you want, but there's no ability to set that high-low average box at all. You can set the high and low for the entire screen, but there's no average thing on the camera itself. So I would say the HIC Micro has just about the right number of features, but they need to work on their interaction model a little bit. Now the Seek. The Seek is weird. So first off, before we get into the features, I just gotta say the screen viewing angle is wild. If you look at the screen you're looking at and shift it off to the left, and you see the screen goes darker, right? You shift it off to the right, screen goes darker and about the same way. When you are looking straight onto the Seek, it looks like you've already tilted the screen away from you because looking straight on looks dim. And when you turn the left away from you, it gets way clearer. And if you turn the right away from you, it gets way darker. I don't know what's up with that screen, but it should not be the way that it is. And getting into features, it feels like they don't expect anyone who has thermal certification to use their cameras at all. You can set the level and span of the camera, but it is so difficult to hit the touch targets. It's absurd. If the on-screen UI is pulled up where you have the buttons at the bottom of the screen that lets you change like the color parameters or lets you swipe down that UI, you have to tap in the middle of the screen to turn that UI clear. And then you have to tap the temperature bar to show the lock-unlock buttons at the top span and the bottom span. You then need to tap the lock symbol. Say we're changing the high one. You have to tap the lock symbol to lock it. And then you have to successfully tap the number in order to bring up the spot where it will let you change that number to something else. Now, it will let you type in the number you want, which is great, but getting there is such a pain, and the tap targets are so tiny. I would not want to do this ever out in the field, especially if I'm dealing with a screen that is too dim because for some reason the viewing angle is all screwed up. And then when you go into changing emissivity, background temp, you can change emissivity. You cannot change background temp, but they have only certain emissivities that you can pick. You can set it to 97%, 80%, 60%, and 30%. And 30% is wild because, again, you cannot change the background radiation. So if the thing you're shooting at absolutely has 30% emissivity, it's going to be impossible to get an accurate temperature off of that because you cannot change the background temp to be able to see what is actually reflecting off of that surface. Now, absurdly, this camera is the only one out of all of these that has the ability to put that box on there with the hot, cold, and average. I don't know why they decided to put that feature on, but, a win is a win, right? Now, one of the wins for the Seek is that it has the highest resolution out of all of these cameras. But you wouldn't know it by looking at the picture. The pictures look terrible and grainy, and it looks like there's like dead pixels in certain parts of the center going across. It's none of the other cameras look like this. And it's not the color presets. I tried a bunch of color presets, and it all ends up being that same sort of grainy, like there's something wrong with the sensor type of an image. So compared to the HIC Micro, which has less pixels, it looks worse. It's an objectively worse looking image. And while it's not as bad as the FLIRs, because again, the FLIR has the lowest resolution out of all of these that we're testing, there is also the problem of you cannot manipulate these images afterwards. Off of this brand that seems to exist solely for taking thermal images. They have no software for it, which is a great transition into looking at the software, the mobile apps, the desktop apps, editing these images afterwards. Something that is important to note before we get into this is, if you're not familiar with how thermal images work and thermal cameras, every brand of thermal imager out there has its own proprietary thermal image format. A lot of them are shown as JPEG, but you cannot edit, say, a client image in the HIC micro software or vice versa. So if your brand doesn't offer an editing software, you are sheer out of luck if you want to edit those images afterwards. With that being said, what we're going to look at is it easy to load these images onto a mobile device? Again, we're looking at field inspections. So I'm expecting me and other people that I manage to be doing all this stuff out in the field. I don't want them to have to come to an office or try to dig out their laptop in order to edit these images if they don't have to. Second thing is, how good is the manipulation of the images in the provided software, either mobile or desktop? And can you easily create a report that you can send to the customer or keep for your own records? So, we started with the Klein. I'm actually impressed with the Klein mobile software in that offloading is probably the most straightforward. So offloading the images from the imager to your iPad or your iPhone. I don't have an Android device, so I can't speak to that, but I would assume it's a similar situation as with the iPhone. Offloading those images is pretty straightforward. You turn on the hotspot on your thermal imager, you go into the app on your phone, you tell it this is the model of Klein that I'm using, and it finds that Wi-Fi network, asks to connect to it, it connects to it, pulls up all your images. Now, in practice, super unreliable getting that connection actually made, but it is straightforward to actually get that process started. I had to try the process over and over and over. Eventually, it did connect, and I was able to offload those images, and, it's fine. It only gives you the photos, and their software, they don't have any software. They don't have any software for editing these photos, so whatever you took on your imager is what you're stuck with for whatever report you're doing. It doesn't have any reporting software. It just lets you download the pictures, and that's it. Which, Klein doesn't do thermal imaging, so I'm not terribly surprised, but it is disappointing that there's no software whatsoever. Now let's talk about the FLIR stuff. FLIR has been around for forever, so theoretically their software should be great, right? So connecting is kind of a nightmare, and it's a nightmare for a lot of these, to be honest. I have a suspicion that there was a time where iOS existed with the networking stuff in a way where everybody designed their app to be able to connect to their cameras in a certain way. And then iOS probably changed something for some networking security reason, and nobody has done the work to get their stuff to work with their apps properly. So with that being said, we'll get back into this. The FLIR C5 has no ability to create its own Wi-Fi hotspot to connect to. And even though they said you can use like a hotspot from your phone and have the imager connect to that does not work. I tried a bunch of different, like turning on and off and trying a bunch of times. I tried putting in its IP address. It lets you put in an IP address if you're having issues. That does not work. I had to connect both my iPad and the FLIR to a third network. And then they finally talked. Once connected to my home network, it was fine. It gives you the option to stream or import, even though this model does not do streaming. But you import the images. Editing is fine. You can do a lot with the editor. It acts funky on iPad because clearly they made it for an iPhone, and it's just not made to take the advantage of the full iPad screen. But you know how the FLIR couldn't add that average to the box that we made earlier in our photos. You can add that average in FLIR tools, but there's no custom templates for reporting. There's no batch processing. You can do that stuff on the desktop software. Desktop software, also the same. The desktop software is honestly best in the business. You can do literally anything with it, but you do have to cough up hundreds of dollars a year for a subscription to do things like batch processing and custom templates, which is absurd. But some companies can absorb that cost. We're just not sort of at that scale. Now let's talk about the Seek again. I keep running into things where the Seek is just objectively kind of hilarious. How hard it is to do the things you want to do. The main app that shows up when you look for Seek thermal camera in the App Store it's for the app for the device that connects directly to your phone, not for these point and shoot ones, or I don't know if they have pistol ones or not, but that one is a completely different one called Seek View. I could not find it organically in the App Store. I had to go to their documentation, figure out what the name of it was, search that specific name, and then it showed up. I don't know what's going on over there. So it did connect to the camera, but you have to have cell connection turned off. This is a pattern with most of these. If you're having issues connecting with your thermal camera, turn your cellular connection off, and then often it will just instantly work. Again, I don't know what's going on with the networking stuff, but it is what it is. Some editing is possible, but when you go in to try to change the span and level of an image, it absolutely goes nuts. And it defaults to, I think, starting you down at negative 40 degrees Celsius, even though the numbers show around where you originally were. I was trying to edit a picture and I saved it, and when I went back into it, it said something around negative 40 degrees Celsius. And I'm like, I don't know how it got there. I don't know what it's doing. The software is not clearly not worked on in any meaningful way. It's very bad. Don't use it. But finally, we'll talk about the HIC Micro software. You turn it on, connect your iPad, your iPhone to it, make sure the cellular connection's off, and then it does work great. The HIC Micro does actually have a streaming function. It looks like a VNC stream of the camera's screen, just streaming to your mobile device, which is, cool. I don't have a use for it, but there it is. Importing's really smooth. You can do just about any editing you want in this app. With the exception of it has like a weird edge case when trying to change the level and the span. It doesn't really want to let you change the temperatures outside of the measured temperatures of the picture. So in my case, I was trying to change it to 25 at the low end, 35 at the high end. It kept wanting to take me down to 31 degrees, which was the highest temperature it was reading in that picture. I would like to be able to have more freedom than that, but I understand why they did what they did. It's just different and weird and unexpected. Honestly, it's fine. It's just you need to know that that's what's going on. The reports seem good. Throwing together simple reports is fine. They do have custom templates in the mobile app, which is great. So all around, great mobile app, better than FLIR's in terms of reporting. Also, it does have the ability to put that box in there of the high, low, average temp. So it has all of the editing capabilities you'd really need for manipulating your thermal images afterwards. Their desktop app is also surprisingly good for a brand that I had not heard of in thermal cameras before I started this process. And on the desktop app, you can change the span setting from being only the default of the high and the low that is in the image to being basically the entire range of the camera, which is nice if you want that flexibility. You can batch edit pictures. You can basically select an image and say, okay, the rest of the images in my editing queue apply these changes to, and it'll just do it. And then also custom templates, which is nice. Honestly, I don't have a lot of bad things to say about the HIC Micro stuff. It's a surprisingly decent ecosystem. Now, before I close this out and give you my final thoughts, I wanted to sort of acknowledge the elephant in the room. Fluke is another respected member of the thermal camera manufacturers. Now, I did look at Fluke to see if I should try buying their camera in this category. It's the Fluke PTI 120. But the thing is, you have to buy that at over $1,000, and all of these are like $600 or less. And the resolution is worse than the FLIR, which is absurd. And I have to admit, I did buy another camera for this test, and that is the Klein Tools TI-270, which happens to be the exact same resolution as the Fluke one. Now, Klein advertises this one as having 10,800 pixels, which this is probably why they've been advertising their thermal cameras in terms of number of pixels instead of resolution, because the resolution is, quite frankly, embarrassing. It's 120 by 90, which for any inspection, reporting, serious professional use is way too low to have any sort of flexibility in how you're using the thing. This is often the range of those that plug into your phone, that range of like homeowner-style thermal cameras. And this has a 50-degree field of view. So you have to get farther away from an image to capture more. But you don't want to do that because resolution's terrible. On the Klein TI-270, which again is the same resolution as the Fluke, is $400 compared to the Fluke, which is $1,090. I took a side-by-side comparison of the TI-270 and the TI-290, and you can see there's less radiation being absorbed by the sensor, and the resolution is objectively worse. And I don't really fault Klein for this camera. It is only $400. I absolutely find it absurd that Fluke is selling this camera at this absurdly high price. Like, nobody should be getting that camera at all. I mean, like, Fluke does have editing software, so that's a plus for them. And it's fine, it's good, but if you're doing professional inspections and stuff, that's not the camera you should be using at all. And homeowners shouldn't get it either. I don't know who that camera's for, quite honestly. But moving on, the cameras that we've tested, we've looked at. What are my final thoughts? The Klein, it is the worst of all of them. It is also the cheapest of all of them at $500. The fact that there's no editing software is a non-starter for me. If you don't need that, then you should probably go with something that's even cheaper from Klein, something that doesn't have that resolution. It's not a product for me. The Seek Shot Pro is embarrassing in so many strange ways, and I would not recommend anybody get that for just a bunch of reasons. The hardware is weird, the interaction's weird, you can't do enough settings, it doesn't have editing software that works. It does have editing software, but it actively works against you to edit it. The FLIR is fine. My impression with the current FLIR C5 is that they need someone to light a fire under them to make better hardware for the price point that they're aiming for. They are the Mac Daddy of the industry, but that has gotten them a little bit lazy on their laurels, and they need somebody to shake it up, which is, frankly, HIC Micro. I was really impressed at the HIC Micro Pocket 2 and their software, and that's what I'm going to be going with going forward and getting for our technicians to use. It does need some refinement. You can't do everything on camera, but you can do enough on camera, and then also, if you really need to quick edit something on your phone to get that average value or whatever, you can do that, and that's pretty straightforward. The whole interaction model, from setting up your photo to taking the photo to getting it on your phone or even getting it on your computer, is really straightforward, and I like it. And that's my winner out of all of these cameras. But let me know what you think. If you have experience with any of these cameras, or there's brands that I missed, feel free to drop that in the comments. I would love to know more about what other people are experiencing in this space as well. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this. And with that, we'll talk to you next time.